The sound of rifle shots cracking through the canyon air made Tala Lopez drop to her knees behind a cluster of boulders. Her medicine bag clutched tight against her chest as dust kicked up around her from the soldiers' bullets. New Mexico Territory, 1878, was unforgiving to Apache healers who dared venture near white settlements, even when called to save a dying child. She had known the risk when she crossed into Colfax 3 days ago to treat the Mexican woman's fevered son, but the boy's life had hung in the balance, and Tala's grandmother had taught her that healing knew no boundaries. Now, as she pressed herself against the sun-heated rock and listened to the soldiers' horses thundering closer, she wondered if her compassion would be her death sentence. The cavalry unit had spotted her leaving the settlement at dawn, and they had given chase immediately. She knew what they saw when they looked at her. A young Apache woman of 23 winters, long black hair braided down her back, wearing traditional clothing and carrying the sacred herbs and tools of her calling. To them, she was not a healer, but a savage, someone to be hunted and brought in chains to the reservation, or worse, to be shot on sight if she resisted. The territorial governor had issued orders to round up any Apache found off reservation lands, and the soldiers followed those orders with enthusiasm that bordered on bloodlust. Tala's breath came in ragged gasps as she calculated her options. The canyon stretched ahead, narrowing into a passage she knew led deeper into the wilderness, but the soldiers were cutting off that route. Behind her, the land opened into exposed desert where she would be an easy target. Her fingers touched the small knife at her belt, useless against rifles but a comfort nonetheless. She whispered a prayer to the spirits her grandmother had taught her to honor, asking for guidance, for protection, for a miracle she had no right to expect. The miracle came in the form of a weathered cowboy on a paint horse, emerging from a side trail she had not noticed. He was tall in the saddle, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His hat was pulled low, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew every rock and ridge of this land. When he saw her crouched behind the boulders, he did not hesitate. He spurred his horse forward, leaning down with one arm extended toward her. "You want to live, you come with me now," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Those soldiers are 30 seconds behind you, and they are not in a talking mood." Tala's instincts warred within her. Trusting a white man went against everything her people had learned through blood and betrayal, but the alternative was certain capture or death. She made her decision in the space of a heartbeat, grasping his forearm as he hauled her up behind him on the horse. The medicine bag bounced against her side as the paint horse leaped forward, the cowboy guiding it with expert precision down a trail barely wide enough for the animal's hooves. Behind them, shouts erupted as the soldiers spotted them. More rifle shots rang out, the bullets whining past too close for comfort. The cowboy leaned forward, urging his horse faster, and Tala wrapped her arms around his waist to keep from being thrown off. She could feel the solid strength of him, the steady thud of his heart through his shirt, and smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to him. They rode hard for what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, the paint horse navigating terrain that would have broken the legs of lesser mounts. The cowboy seemed to know every hidden path, every narrow passage between the rocks. He led them through a series of switchbacks that climbed higher into the mountains, where the pines grew thick and the air turned cooler. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, but he did not slow until they reached a place where a waterfall tumbled down into a clear pool, hidden on 3 sides by sheer rock walls. "Down," he said, and Tala slid from the horse's back, her legs shaky from the wild ride. She watched as the cowboy dismounted and led the paint horse into the pool, walking the animal through the shallow water toward the waterfall. Behind the curtain of falling water, she glimpsed a dark opening in the rock face. "A cave," she said softly, understanding his plan. "My cave," he corrected, glancing back at her. "And if you want to stay breathing, you will follow me inside and keep quiet. Those soldiers are persistent when they get a scent." Tala waded into the pool, the cold water shocking after the heat of the desert. She followed him through the waterfall, the cascade soaking her to the skin in seconds, and emerged into a spacious cave that opened up beyond the narrow entrance. Light filtered in through cracks in the rock above, revealing a space that had clearly been used as a shelter before. She saw blankets neatly folded in one corner, supplies stacked against the wall, a fire pit with stones arranged in a circle. The cowboy secured his horse to an iron ring driven into the rock, then turned to face her properly for the first time. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes studied her with an intensity that made her pull her wet clothing tighter around herself. "Name is Lucas Jameson," he said, "and you just became the most wanted woman in New Mexico territory if you were not already." "I am Tala Lopez," she replied, lifting her chin despite her vulnerable position. "I committed no crime. I healed a child who was dying of fever." "You are Apache," Lucas said flatly. "That is crime enough for the cavalry. They have been rounding up any native they find for the past 6 months, trying to force everyone onto the reservations. Governor's orders." "I know the orders," Tala said bitterly. "I know that my people are being starved and murdered on those reservations, given diseased blankets and spoiled food, treated worse than animals. I will die free before I go there willingly." Lucas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough, but you cannot leave here, not yet. Those soldiers saw me take you, and they will be searching every inch of this territory. My face is now connected to yours, which means I just made myself an enemy of the United States Army." The weight of what he had done settled over Tala like a heavy blanket. "Why did you help me?" "You do not know me. You owe me nothing." He turned away, busying himself with unsaddling his horse. "I know enough. I know what the cavalry does to Apache women they catch alone. I know that whatever you did in town, it was not worth dying for. And I know that I could not live with myself if I rode past and let them take you." His words were simple, but they carried a conviction that surprised her. She watched him work, noting the careful way he handled his horse, the efficiency of his movements. This was a man accustomed to living alone, to taking care of himself and his mount without wasted effort. "How long must I stay hidden?" she asked. Lucas paused, considering the question. "Weeks at minimum, maybe months. The army will search hard at first, then the intensity will fade. They have too much territory to cover and too few soldiers. Eventually they will move on to other concerns. But until then you cannot be seen." "Months," Tala repeated, the word tasting strange in her mouth. She thought of her grandmother waiting for her return, of the other members of her small band who had scattered into the mountains to avoid capture. They would think her dead or taken. "I am sorry," Lucas said, and he sounded like he meant it. "But it is the only way to keep you alive. This cave is well hidden. I use it when I am working the high country, checking on my cattle and horses. No one else knows about it. You are a rancher, of sorts. I run a small operation in the valley below, nothing fancy. 100 head of cattle, some horses I break and sell. It keeps me fed and gives me reason to stay in the mountains where I prefer to be." He finished with his horse and turned back to her. "You are shivering. We need to get you out of those wet clothes and into something dry." Tala's hand moved instinctively to her medicine bag, checking that it had remained sealed during their passage through the waterfall. The leather was soaked, but intact, her herbs and tools protected by the inner wrapping of oilcloth her grandmother had insisted upon. Lucas pulled a set of clothes from his supplies, a spare shirt and a pair of pants that would be far too large for her. "These will have to do until your things dry. I will turn my back." She waited until he had turned away before quickly stripping off her wet clothing and pulling on his shirt. It hung on her like a dress, falling to mid-thigh, and she had to roll the sleeves several times to free her hands. The pants were impossible, the waist far too large, so she used a length of rope from his supplies to tie them around herself. The rough fabric chafed after the softness of her buckskin dress, but it was dry and warm, and for that she was grateful. "You can look now," she said. Lucas turned, and something flickered in his eyes as he saw her swimming in his clothes, but he said nothing about her appearance. Instead, he moved to the fire pit and began building a small fire using wood from a stack kept dry in the cave. "We cannot have a large fire because the smoke might be spotted, but a small one should be safe. The cracks in the rock disperse it enough that it looks like morning mist." As the flames caught and grew, Tala arranged her wet clothing on rocks near the fire to dry. She watched Lucas work, noticing the competence in everything he did. This was a man who had lived rough and learned hard lessons. She wondered what had brought him to this solitary life in the mountains, what demons or dreams drove him to prefer the company of cattle and horses to people. "There is dried beef in that pack," Lucas said, pointing to one of the saddlebags. "And hardtack, though I warn you it is about as appetizing as eating leather. Help yourself to whatever you need." Tala retrieved the food, her stomach reminding her that she had not eaten since the previous evening. She sat near the fire, tearing into the dried beef with her teeth, and watched Lucas settle across from her. The cave felt suddenly smaller, more intimate with just the two of them and the crackling fire between them. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did, for risking yourself." Lucas shrugged, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Those soldiers, they do not represent justice. They represent fear and greed and the worst parts of what is happening to this territory. I have seen what they do, the settlements they burn, the people they kill without trial or mercy. I wanted no part of that, especially not in hunting down a woman whose only crime was healing a sick child. How did you know that was what I had done? I did not for certain. But I saw you come out of Maria Gutierrez's house 3 mornings ago. I was in town buying supplies. I saw the gratitude in her eyes when she watched you leave, saw her make the sign of the cross like you were an angel sent by God himself. I figured you had done something good, not something worth dying for." He paused, feeding another small stick into the fire. "Her boy, did he live?" "He will live," Tala confirmed. "The fever broke the night before I left. I stayed to make sure he was strong enough that the sickness would not return. His mother paid me with food and a silver coin, though I told her it was not necessary. Maria is a good woman. She lost her husband last year to a mine collapse. That boy is all she has left in the world." They fell into silence, the weight of the day's events settling over them both. Outside the cave, the sound of the waterfall provided a constant, soothing backdrop. Tala found herself studying Lucas in the firelight, noting the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days squinting into the sun, the calluses on his hands that told of hard work. He was handsome in a rugged way, she realized, with a face that was honest and open despite the hardness life had carved into it. "What will you do about your ranch while you are here with me?" she asked. "I will have to ride down every few days to check on things, make sure the cattle have not scattered or been stolen, tend to the horses." but I can do that in the early morning or late evening when I am less likely to be spotted and followed. The cave is stocked well enough to keep us both fed for a while, and there is fresh water from the pool. We will manage. You speak as though you plan to stay here with me." Lucas met her eyes across the fire. "Did you think I would hide you here and then abandon you? You do not know this country the way I do. You would not last a week without help, even with the cave for shelter. And if the soldiers found you alone, without anyone to vouch for you or protect you, they would not bother taking you back to face charges. They would just put a bullet in you and report that you resisted arrest." The casual way he spoke of her potential murder sent a chill down Tala's spine, but she knew he was speaking truth. The soldiers of the United States Army had proven time and again that Apache lives meant nothing to them. "So you will stay," she said softly. "You will give up your life below, your ranch and your freedom to guard a stranger in a cave." "I will do what is right," Lucas said simply. "The ranch will be there when this is over, and you are not a stranger anymore. You are Tala Lopez, Apache healer, and I am Lucas Jameson, the fool cowboy who could not ride past when you needed help." Despite herself, despite the fear and exhaustion and uncertainty, Tala felt a smile tug at her lips. A fool cowboy indeed. As darkness fell outside and the cave grew dim except for the small fire, they arranged their sleeping areas on opposite sides of the space. Lucas insisted she take the better pile of blankets, and he made do with a single wool covering and his saddle for a pillow. Tala lay awake long after he had fallen asleep, listening to his steady breathing and wondering at the strange turn her life had taken. She had woken that morning expecting to slip quietly back to her people in the mountains. Now she was trapped in a cave with a white cowboy who had risked everything to save her, facing the prospect of months in hiding. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Lucas would rise before dawn, slip out through the waterfall, and make his way down to his ranch to tend to his livestock, and check that no soldiers were lurking nearby. He always returned by mid-morning with fresh supplies when he could risk taking them, eggs or milk or vegetables from a small garden he maintained. They would eat together, portions small to make their stores last, and then the long hours of the day would stretch before them. At first they maintained a careful distance, speaking only when necessary, each aware of the other in a way that made the cave feel smaller than it was. But isolation has a way of breaking down barriers, and slowly they began to talk. Tala told him about her grandmother, the great healer who had taught her the ways of medicine, how to read the plants and prepare the remedies that could draw out poisons and break fevers. She spoke of growing up in the mountains, of learning to move silently through the forest and read the signs that nature left for those patient enough to observe. Lucas, in turn, shared pieces of his own story. He had come west from Missouri after the war, unable to return to a home that held too many painful memories. He did not speak directly of what he had seen or done during those bloody years, but Tala could read the shadows that crossed his face when the subject arose. He had found work as a ranch hand, learned the trade of cattle and horses, and eventually saved enough to buy his own small piece of land in the valley below Colfax. It was not much, he admitted, but it was his, and it represented a kind of freedom he had never known before. "Why did you never marry?" Tala asked one afternoon as they sat near the cave entrance, watching the waterfall cascade into the pool. It had been 3 weeks since her rescue, and the question had been forming in her mind as she observed him, this solitary man who seemed so self-sufficient yet so alone. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the water. "I suppose I never found a woman who wanted the kind of life I lead. Most women want a house in town, neighbors, a church social every Sunday. They want a man who comes home for supper every night and does not spend half his time in the mountains with cattle and coyotes. I could never be that man, and it seemed unfair to ask someone to settle for less than what they deserved. Perhaps you were looking at the wrong women, Tala suggested gently. Not all women want the same things. Some of us prefer the mountains to the town, the sky overhead to a roof, the company of someone genuine to the false smiles of society. He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Tala felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny. Something had been building between them during these weeks of forced proximity, a connection that went beyond mere survival or circumstance. She found herself watching for his return each morning with an eagerness that had nothing to do with the supplies he brought. She noticed things about him, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the small scar on his knuckle from a horse bite, the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and open. "You are a wise woman, Tala Lopez," Lucas said softly. "My grandmother would laugh to hear you say so. She always said I was too impulsive, too willing to rush in where I should step carefully. Like riding into a white settlement to heal a sick child, exactly like that." They shared a smile, and the moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Then Lucas stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "I should check the snares I set yesterday. We are running low on fresh meat." He disappeared into the forest, leaving Tala alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that her feelings for this cowboy had become dangerously complicated. She had never imagined caring for a white man, had been raised on stories of betrayal and violence perpetrated by his people against hers. Yet Lucas defied those stories. He was kind without being patronizing, strong without being cruel, and he treated her not as a savage or a burden but as an equal deserving of respect. That evening, as they roasted the rabbits he had caught and shared a pot of coffee brewed strong and black over their small fire, Lucas spoke of his plans. "The cavalry patrols have been less frequent this past week. I think they are starting to believe you escaped the territory or died in the desert. In another month, maybe 2, it should be safe enough for you to move on, to find your people or make your way to safer ground." The thought of leaving should have filled Tala with relief. Instead, it settled like a stone in her chest. "And what will you do? Return to your ranch and your solitary life?" "I suppose so. It is what I know." "Does that still seem enough to you? After these weeks, after everything, does that life still satisfy you the way it did before?" Lucas set down his coffee cup and met her eyes across the fire. "No," he admitted. "It does not, but I do not know what else to do about it." Tala's heart hammered in her chest as she made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She stood and walked around the fire to where he sat, lowering herself beside him. "You could ask me to stay." "Tala," he breathed, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a plea combined. "You do not know what you are saying. Your people would never accept you if you stayed with me. My people would make your life hell. We would face hatred and danger from all sides." "I have faced hatred and danger my entire life," she said quietly. "It would be nothing new. But spending my days with a man I respect, a man I have come to care for deeply, sharing the work and the struggle and the small joys, that would be new. That would be worth fighting for." Lucas reached up slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face in his rough palm. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with unshed tears. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words raw and honest. "I have been falling since the moment you wrapped your arms around me on that horse and trusted me to save you. Every morning I wake up, and the first thing I think about is seeing your face. Every night I lie awake wishing I could pull you into my arms and hold you while you sleep. But I do not want to be selfish. I do not want to trap you in a life that will be harder than anything you have known." "You are not trapping me," Tala whispered, leaning into his touch. "You are offering me a choice, and I am choosing you. I am choosing this, whatever it may bring." He kissed her then, soft and careful at first, as though she might break under too much pressure. But Tala had survived the desert and the soldiers, and a lifetime of hardship that had made her strong, not fragile. She kissed him back with all the longing and hope and fierce determination she possessed, her hands fisting in his shirt to pull him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming something desperate and hungry, weeks of denied attraction finally given release. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked one more time. "There is no going back once we cross this line." "I am sure," Tala said firmly. "I want this. I want you." They made love slowly in the firelight, learning the landscape of each other's bodies with reverent attention. Lucas treated her like something precious, his touches worshipful, his whispered words a litany of devotion. Tala gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, offering her trust and her heart along with her body. When it was done, and they lay tangled together in the blankets, skin to skin and breath mingling, Tala felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she felt truly safe, truly seen, truly home. The weeks that followed were both the happiest and most challenging of Tala's life. She and Lucas moved through their days with a new intimacy, small touches and shared glances speaking volumes. But they also began to plan for the future, and the reality of what they were attempting became impossible to ignore. They could not simply walk down into Colfax and announce their intention to be together. Lucas would be branded a traitor to his race, accused of sympathizing with the enemy. Tala would be arrested on sight or worse. "We need to leave the territory," Lucas said one morning as they discussed their options. "Start fresh somewhere. The war between the Army and the Apache is not so immediate. Colorado, maybe, or north into Wyoming. Find a place where we can just be two people trying to build a life." "What about your ranch?" Tala asked. "You worked so hard for it." "I can sell it or just walk away. Land is just land. You are worth more to me than any piece of property." His words warmed her, but she could also hear the sacrifice in them. The ranch represented everything he had built from nothing, his one solid achievement in a life marked by war and wandering. To give it up for her felt like too much to ask. "Perhaps there is another way," she said slowly, an idea forming. "My grandmother, she lives deep in the mountains with a small group of our people who refuse to go to the reservation. They survive by staying hidden, moving frequently, trading quietly with friendly Mexicans and sympathetic whites. What if we went to them? What if we asked for their blessing and their help?" Lucas looked skeptical. An Apache band accepting a white man into their midst, Tala, they would more likely put an arrow through me than welcome me. "Not if I vouch for you. Not if I explain what you did, how you saved me, how you kept me safe at great risk to yourself. My grandmother is wise and fair. She will listen." It took several more days of discussion, weighing the risks and benefits before Lucas agreed. The alternative was running, always looking over their shoulders, never truly safe or settled. If they could gain the acceptance of Tala's people, they would have protection, community, a chance at a real life together. It was worth the risk. They began preparing for the journey, gathering supplies and waiting for the right moment. Lucas made a final trip down to his ranch, not to sell it but to set it up as though he had left for an extended cattle drive. He left a note with his nearest neighbor, a decent man named Frank, saying he was heading to Colorado to look at breeding stock and would be gone several months. It would buy them time before anyone came looking. On a cool morning in late autumn, nearly 4 months after Tala had first fled the soldiers, they left the cave that had sheltered them through the long summer. Lucas rode his paint horse, and Tala sat behind him as she had that first desperate day. But now her arms around his waist were born of love rather than fear. They traveled north and east, deeper into the wilderness where the army rarely ventured, following trails that Tala knew from her childhood. It took 5 days of hard riding, sleeping rough under the stars and eating sparingly from their supplies, before they reached the hidden canyon where Tala's grandmother had established their camp. As they approached, they were intercepted by scouts, young Apache men with rifles and bows who emerged from the rocks like spirits. They recognized Tala immediately, their stern faces breaking into expressions of relief and joy. "We thought you dead," one of them said in Apache. "We heard the soldiers chased you into the desert." "They chased me to salvation," Tala replied in the same language, then switched to English so Lucas could understand. "This is Lucas Jameson. He saved my life and has protected me for these many months. I ask that you bring us to my grandmother so that I may explain all that has happened." The scouts were wary of Lucas, their hands never straying far from their weapons, but they honored Tala's request. They guided the pair through a narrow passage into a sheltered canyon where 24 Apache had made their home in a series of wickiups and brush shelters. Children stopped their play to stare at the white man, and women paused in their work, their faces hardening with suspicion. Tala's grandmother emerged from the largest wickiup, moving with the careful dignity of her 70 winters. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her hair white as winter snow, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She looked at Tala, then at Lucas, then back to her granddaughter, and Tala saw understanding dawn in those ancient eyes. "Grandmother," Tala said, dismounting and approaching with proper respect, "I have returned, and I bring with me the man who saved my life. May we speak?" The old woman studied Lucas for a long moment, taking in his respectful posture, the way he kept his hands visible and non-threatening, the protective way he watched Tala. Finally, she nodded. "Come, we will talk and you will tell me everything." They sat in the grandmother's wickiup, the three of them, and Tala told the story from beginning to end. She spoke of healing Maria's son, of the soldiers' pursuit, of Lucas's rescue, and the months they spent in the cave. She spoke honestly about her feelings for him, about their love, and about their desire to build a life together with the blessing of her people. Lucas remained mostly silent, letting Tala speak, but when the grandmother asked him direct questions, he answered truthfully and without embellishment. "Why did you help her?" the old woman asked in careful English. "You must have known the danger." "Because it was right," Lucas said simply. "Because I have seen too much cruelty and done nothing, and I was tired of being that man. Because when I looked at her, I saw a person who deserved to live, and that was reason enough. And now you wish to stay with us, to live as we live, hunted and hidden, always watchful." "I wish to stay with Tala," Lucas corrected gently. "Wherever that may be. If it is here, then I will learn your ways and contribute what I can. If you choose to send us away, then we will find our own path. But I will not leave her, and I will protect her with my life if needed." The grandmother looked at Tala. "This is what you want. To bind yourself to this white man, knowing the hardship it will bring?" "It is what I want," Tala confirmed. "I love him, grandmother. He has shown me kindness and respect and partnership. With him I am stronger, not weaker. Together we can face whatever comes." The old woman was silent for a long time, her eyes distant as she considered. Finally, she spoke. "The world is changing in ways we cannot stop. The old ways are dying, and we must adapt or die with them. Perhaps love between our peoples is part of that adaptation, a bridge where now there is only a chasm. She looked at Lucas directly. You will be tested. The people here have suffered greatly at the hands of men who look like you. You must prove yourself trustworthy again and again until even the most suspicious are convinced. Can you do this with patience and humility? I can, Lucas said. I will. Then you may stay for now. But understand this, Cowboy. If you ever harm my granddaughter, if you ever betray the trust we place in you, there will be no mercy. Do you understand? I understand, and I accept those terms. The grandmother nodded, satisfied, and dismissed them with a wave of her gnarled hand. As they emerged from the wickiup, Tala felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as she shook with emotion. We have a home, she whispered against his chest. We truly have a home. We have each other, Lucas corrected. That is all we need, but having this too is a blessing I will never take for granted. The following months were a period of adjustment for everyone. Lucas worked tirelessly to prove himself to the Apache band, helping with the hunting, sharing his knowledge of horses, learning their language with dedicated effort. The men tested him in subtle and not so subtle ways, watching to see if he would lose his temper or prove unreliable. He passed every test with quiet determination, never complaining, never expecting special treatment. Tala continued her work as a healer, tending to the illnesses and injuries that arose in their small community. She also taught Lucas about the plants and herbs she used, sharing her knowledge freely. He proved an apt student, his rancher's understanding of animal medicine translating well to some aspects of human healing. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths. As winter settled over the mountains, Lucas and Tala built their own wickiup on the edge of the encampment. Not quite integrated into the heart of the community, but no longer outsiders either. They furnished it simply with blankets and cooking pots, a few tools and weapons, everything needed for survival and nothing more. On the coldest nights, they would lie tangled together under piles of furs and blankets, talking in whispers about their hopes and dreams. You regret it? Tala asked one such night, her head pillowed on his chest. Giving up your ranch, your old life? Not for a single moment, Lucas said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. That life was empty, Tala. I was just existing, moving from one day to the next without purpose beyond basic survival. With you, I am living. Every day has meaning because you are in it. I feel the same, she admitted. I was always so focused on my duty as a healer, on serving my people, that I never considered what I might want for myself. But I want you. I want the life we are building together, hard as it may be. In early spring, as the snows melted and new growth appeared on the trees, Tala's grandmother performed a ceremony binding Lucas and Tala together according to Apache tradition. It was simple and profound, involving the exchange of gifts, the speaking of vows before the community, and the blessing of the elders. Lucas wore clothing that the women had made for him, buckskin pants and a shirt decorated with beadwork, and Tala wore a dress her grandmother had been saving for this purpose, white doeskin adorned with shells and turquoise. As they stood together before the assembled people, speaking their promises to care for and honor each other, Lucas felt a completeness he had never experienced before. This was not the life he had imagined when he came west all those years ago, but it was the life he was meant to live. He was sure of it with every fiber of his being. The celebration that followed was modest by necessity, but joyful. There was roasted venison and stewed rabbit, cornbread made from precious flour obtained through trade, and even a small amount of honey to sweeten the festivities. The Apache people who had been so suspicious of Lucas months ago now accepted him, if not entirely as one of their own, then at least as Tala's chosen partner and a member of the community. They clapped him on the shoulder and offered their congratulations, and he felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire or the food. That night, alone in their wickiup, Lucas and Tala made love as husband and wife, a new intimacy layered onto the physical connection they had already forged. Afterwards, as Tala drowsed in his arms, Lucas stared up at the smoke hole in the roof of their home and watched the stars wheel overhead. He thought about the long, strange journey that had brought him to this moment, all the pain and loss that had shaped him, all the choices good and bad that had led him to that canyon on the day Tala needed saving. "Thank you," he whispered to whatever God or fate might be listening. "Thank you for giving me this." The seasons turned and life continued in its rhythms of survival and small joys. Lucas became skilled at moving through the forest as silently as his Apache brothers, at reading the signs of game and weather that meant the difference between plenty and scarcity. Tala's reputation as a healer grew, and occasionally, people would find their hidden camp, Mexicans or sympathetic whites who had heard whispers of the Apache medicine woman and needed help that no town doctor could provide. Lucas would stand guard during these encounters, ensuring no one brought soldiers or trouble to their doorstep. In the summer of their second year together, Tala discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with a mixture of joy and fear, knowing that bringing a child into their uncertain world was both a blessing and a tremendous responsibility. But as Tala's belly swelled with new life, as Lucas felt their baby move under his palm, the fear gave way to fierce determination. They would give this child everything they could, love and protection, and a chance at a life free from the hatred that divided their peoples. The baby came in early spring, born with the help of Tala's grandmother and the other women of the camp. It was a hard labor, hours of struggle that left Lucas pacing outside the wickiup like a caged animal, helpless to ease Tala's pain. But when he finally heard the thin, angry wail of his newborn child and was called inside to meet his son, every moment of fear was washed away in a flood of overwhelming love. The boy was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same creek watercolor as his father's. They named him Daniel, a name that honored Lucas's brother who had died in the war, and gave him the Apache name Nashoba, meaning wolf, for the strength and loyalty they hoped he would embody. Lucas held his son in his large, calloused hands and marveled at how something so small and fragile could inspire such powerful feelings. "He is beautiful," Lucas whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect, just like his mother." Tala, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him from her bed of blankets. "He has your stubborn chin already. I fear we are in for trouble when he grows older. Then we will face that trouble together, just as we have faced everything else." Raising Daniel in the hidden Apache camp proved to be both easier and harder than they had anticipated. The child was surrounded by love, doted on by his great-grandmother and the other members of the community who saw in him a symbol of hope for the future. But Lucas and Tala were constantly aware of the danger their mixed-blood son would face if the outside world discovered him. To the white authorities, he would be half-savage, a reminder of forbidden mixing between races. To hostile Apache, he might be seen as contaminated by white blood, not fully one people or the other. But within the safety of their canyon, Daniel thrived. He grew from infant to toddler, taking his first steps with his father's hand supporting him, speaking his first words in a mixture of English and Apache that reflected the dual heritage they were determined to honor. Lucas taught him to ride, setting the boy on a gentle horse while still barely old enough to walk, And Tala taught him the names of plants, and the songs of healing her grandmother had passed down through generations. "He will have the best of both worlds," Tala said one evening as they watched Daniel play with the other children, his laughter ringing through the camp. "He will know the strength and wisdom of the Apache people and the determination and ambition of the white world. He will be a bridge, just as we are." "I hope the world will be ready for him," Lucas said, though doubt colored his words. The reports that filtered to them from the outside told of continued violence and injustice, of Apache leaders killed under flags of truce, of reservations that were little better than prisons. "If it is not, we will make it ready," Tala said with fierce conviction. "By living as we live, by raising our son to be strong and good, by refusing to let hatred win. That is how we change the world, one day and one choice at a time." 2 years after Daniel's birth, Tala gave birth to a daughter, a tiny, fierce thing they named Sarah after Lucas's mother and Kimimla, meaning butterfly for her delicate beauty. With 2 children now filling their wickiup with noise and chaos and boundless love, Lucas and Tala's life took on a new fullness. The days were exhausting, filled with the endless work of keeping young ones fed and safe and reasonably clean, but they were also rich with meaning. Lucas would sometimes think back to his old life, the solitary existence he had led before Tala burst into his world in a hail of bullets and desperation. That man seemed like a stranger now, empty and unformed, not yet fully human. The man he had become, husband and father, protector and provider, was someone he could be proud of. He had found his purpose in loving Tala and their children, in being part of a community that valued him not for what he could produce, but for who he chose to be. Tala's grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep when Daniel was 5 and Sarah was 3. Her death was mourned deeply by the entire camp, for she had been their leader and their anchor through terrible times. But she died satisfied, having seen her granddaughter happy and settled, having held her great-grandchildren and passed on her knowledge to Tala so that the healing wisdom would continue. They buried her in the Apache way, and Lucas stood with his arm around Tala as she grieved, offering what comfort he could. With the grandmother's death, Lucas found himself unexpectedly looked to as one of the leaders of their small band. He had proven himself over the years, his counsel valued for its mixture of practical experience and hard-won wisdom. Together with Tala and 2 of the elder Apache men, he helped guide decisions about when to move camp, how to manage their limited resources, how to handle the occasional encounters with the outside world. It was a responsibility he took seriously, understanding that the lives of more than 24 people depended on the choices they made. He tried always to lead with the same principles that had guided his decision to save Tala all those years ago, choosing compassion over cruelty, wisdom over impulse, the long view over short-term gain. The children grew, Daniel becoming a boy of quick intelligence and natural leadership, Sarah developing into a bright, curious child who followed her mother everywhere and showed early aptitude for healing. Lucas taught them both to ride and shoot, skills necessary for survival, while Tala taught them languages and lore, medicine, and the stories of their people. They were raising children who belonged fully to neither world but could move between both, and Lucas hoped that would be a strength rather than a weakness. By the time Daniel was 10, and Sarah was 8, the world was changing again. The worst of the Apache wars were winding down, exhaustion and pragmatism finally overcoming bloodlust on both sides. The reservations were still terrible places, but some efforts at reform were being made, and a few Apache leaders had negotiated better terms for their people. More importantly, the fervor for hunting down every Apache outside the reservations had diminished. The army had other concerns now, and the civilian population was weary of endless conflict. Lucas and Tala began to cautiously consider whether it might be possible to step back into the wider world, not abandoning their people but perhaps finding a way to live less hidden, less constantly fearful. The discussion was ongoing, involving the whole community, weighing risks and opportunities. Nothing was decided, but the very fact that they could have the conversation felt like progress. One autumn day, Lucas rode out to hunt and came across a familiar landmark, a rock formation shaped like a thumb pointing at the sky. He realized he was near the place where his old ranch had been, the property he had walked away from more than a decade ago to save a desperate Apache healer. On impulse, he guided his horse toward the valley, curious to see what had become of the land he once owned. What he found surprised him. The ranch was still there, the buildings weathered but standing, and cattle grazed in the valley. As he watched from a concealed vantage point, he saw a man emerge from the house, Frank, his old neighbor. Frank had apparently claimed the abandoned property, as was his right after so many years of absence. Lucas felt no anger at this, only a strange nostalgia for the man he had been. He returned to camp that evening thoughtful and quiet. Tala noticed immediately, as she always did, and asked what troubled him. He told her about the ranch, about seeing his old life still existing without him. "You regret not going back?" she asked carefully. "Do you wish you had taken the easier path?" Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Not for 1 second. That ranch was just a place, Tala. This is a life. You and our children, our people, the path we have walked together through fire and fear and everything between, that is real. That is what matters. The ranch was always just something to fill the empty spaces until I found what I was really supposed to be doing. And what is that? Loving you. Building a family. Becoming someone my children can be proud of. Making a small difference in a hard world." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You saved me just as surely as I saved you that day in the canyon. Before you, I was lost. Now I am found." As the years continued to pass, Lucas and Tala watched their children grow into young adults. Daniel, at 18, was already taller than his father, with the lean, strong build of a man who had grown up working hard. He moved with equal ease in both Apache and white society on the rare occasions they interacted with the outside world, his mixed heritage a source of pride rather than shame. Sarah, at 16, had become a skilled healer under her mother's tutelage, and young people began seeking her out for treatment, trusting in her gentle touch and extensive knowledge. Lucas was in his early 50s now, his hair shot through with silver, his body marked by the hard years but still strong. Tala, in her 40s, remained beautiful to him, the lines on her face a map of all they had survived together. Their love had not diminished with time but had deepened, becoming something as essential and unremarkable as breathing. They had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative. There had been seasons of terrible hardship when game was scarce and the band went hungry. There had been close calls with army patrols and hostile settlers. There had been illnesses that tested Tala's skills as a healer and losses that broke their hearts. But through it all, they had each other, and that had been enough. One spring evening, as they sat outside their wickiup watching the sun set over the mountains, Daniel approached them with news. He had met a girl, a young Apache woman from another band that their people occasionally traded and interacted with. Her name was Mate, and Daniel wanted to bring her to meet his parents to ask for their blessing to marry. Lucas and Tala exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing between them in that look. Their son, grown and ready to start his own family. Where had the time gone? "Bring her to us," Tala said warmly. "We will welcome her and hear what is in your heart." When Daniel brought Mate to meet them a week later, Lucas saw immediately what had captured his son's heart. She was lovely, yes, but more importantly, she was strong and intelligent, with a quiet confidence that reminded him of Tala. The young couple sat with them, and Daniel explained that he wanted to marry Mate and that her family was willing, but he wanted his parents' blessing first. "You have it," Lucas said without hesitation. "You are a good man, Daniel, and you have chosen well. Your mother and I trust your judgment, and we welcome Mate into our family." The wedding was held that summer, a joyful occasion that brought together two Apache bands and strengthened the ties between them. Lucas stood with his arm around Tala, watching their son take his vows, and felt the circle completing itself. He had saved Tala, they had built a life together, raised children who were now building their own lives. It was the natural order of things, beautiful and bittersweet. Sarah married 2 years later, choosing a young man named Jack Sterling, the half-Apache son of a white trader and his Apache wife. The match was controversial in some quarters, but Lucas and Tala supported their daughter's choice, recognizing in Jack the same qualities they valued: honesty, kindness, strength of character. The world was changing, becoming more complicated, and perhaps children like theirs, who embodied the blending of two peoples, would be part of the solution rather than the problem. As Lucas entered his 60s, he began to slow down, his body finally showing the wear of a hard life. His joints ached in cold weather, and he could no longer ride for hours without rest. But he was content, surrounded by family that now included 4 grandchildren and another on the way. He had lived to see his children not just survive but thrive, creating families of their own and carrying forward the values he and Tala had worked so hard to instill. The Apache band had also evolved over the years. Some members had chosen to return to the reservations, finding ways to live within the system while maintaining their identity. Others, like Lucas and Tala's family, remained free but had established a kind of détente with the outside world, trading openly and no longer living in constant fear of attack. It was not perfect, not by any stretch, but it was better than the all-out war that had defined previous decades. On a warm summer evening, Lucas and Tala sat together outside the home they had built years ago, a more permanent structure now than the simple wickiup of their early days. Their grandchildren played nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze, and the smell of Tala's cooking filled the air. Lucas reached over and took his wife's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You remember the day we met?" he asked, though he knew she did. They had told the story to their children and grandchildren many times, how a desperate chase and a split-second decision had changed the course of both their lives. "Every detail," Tala confirmed, squeezing his hand. "I remember thinking you were either very brave or very foolish to help me." "Probably both," Lucas admitted with a chuckle, "but it was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life stems from that moment, from choosing to reach down and pull you onto my horse." "I chose you too," Tala reminded him. "I could have run in a different direction, could have refused your help, but something in me knew even then that you were meant to be in my life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Lucas thought about the years behind them, the struggles and the triumphs, the moments of fear and the far more numerous moments of quiet happiness. He thought about the life they had built from nothing but love and determination, and he felt a peace that went bone deep. "If I died tomorrow," he said softly, "I would die a happy man. You gave me everything I never knew I needed, Tala. You gave me purpose and family and a reason to be better than I was. I love you more now than I did on the day we married, and I loved you completely even then." Tala turned to him, her eyes shining with emotion. "Do not speak of dying, old man. You have many years left, and I intend to spend every one of them by your side. We will grow old together, watch our grandchildren grow, and perhaps even meet our great-grandchildren. Our story is not over yet." "No," Lucas agreed, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her temple. "It is not over, and every chapter has been worth living. The seasons continue to turn as they always had and always would." Lucas and Tala grew older. Their children became established members of the community, and their grandchildren grew from babies into young people with dreams and ambitions of their own. The world around them kept changing too, becoming more modern and in some ways more accepting, though prejudice and injustice never entirely disappeared. Through it all, Lucas and Tala remained the center of their family, the foundation upon which 3 generations had been built. They were respected elders now, sought out for advice and wisdom, their love story legendary among both the Apache people and the handful of white families who had come to know them over the years. Daniel had become a leader in his own right, working to negotiate better terms for the Apache people with government officials, using his ability to move between 2 worlds to advocate for justice and fair treatment. Sarah had established herself as a renowned healer, carrying on her mother's and great-grandmother's legacy. Both spoke of their parents with pride and love, crediting Lucas and Tala with giving them the strength and wisdom to navigate a complex, often hostile world. Lucas lived to see his 72nd birthday, a remarkable age for a man who had lived as hard as he had. His hair was white, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were still the same creek water blue, and when he looked at Tala, they still held the same love and wonder they had decades ago, when he first realized he was falling for the Apache healer he had saved. On a cool autumn evening, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep, Tala's hand clasped in his. He died as he had lived his later years, content, loved, and at peace with the choices he had made. His last words, spoken to Tala just hours before he slipped away, were simple and true. "Thank you for letting me love you. It was the greatest adventure of my life." Tala mourned her husband deeply, but not with despair. They had been given more years together than many couples ever dreamed of, and those years had been rich with meaning. She had loved Lucas with all her heart, and she had been loved completely in return. That was more than enough. She lived another 8 years, during which time she became a great-grandmother several times over and watched her family continue to grow and thrive. She told the story of how she and Lucas met to anyone who would listen, wanting the younger generations to understand that love could bridge any divide, that choosing compassion over fear could change not just individual lives but the course of history. When Tala's time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by family in the home she and Lucas had built together. Her last thoughts were of him, of the cowboy who had reached down from his horse and offered salvation to a desperate healer. She died with a smile on her lips, knowing that she would see him again, that their love was not bound by the limitations of the mortal world. They buried her next to Lucas on a hillside overlooking the valley, under the shade of an old oak tree. Their graves were marked with simple stones, their names carved alongside the dates that bracketed lives fully lived. But their true legacy was not in stone, but in the family they had created, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward their values of love and courage and determination. Daniel and Sarah ensured that their parents' story was never forgotten, writing it down and sharing it widely. It became a tale told around fires and in schoolhouses, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love could flourish. The story of the Apache healer and the cowboy who saved her became legend, passed down through generations, a beacon of hope in a world that too often chose division over unity. The family Lucas and Tala built continued to grow and thrive, generation after generation, each carrying forward the legacy of that one desperate moment in a canyon when two people from different worlds came together and chose love over fear. Their descendants became leaders and healers, teachers and advocates, artists and builders, all shaped in some way by the foundation laid by an Apache healer and a cowboy who could not ride past when someone needed help. And in the end, that was the truest measure of their love, not in the passion of those first desperate months hiding in a cave, though that had been real and powerful, but in the lasting impact they had on everyone who came after them. They had proven that love could cross any boundary, overcome any obstacle, if two people were willing to fight for it with everything they had. Lucas had been right all those years ago when he told Tala that he was falling in love with her. He had fallen, completely and irrevocably, and she had fallen with him. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting from the ruins of war and hatred, a family and a legacy that would endure long after their bodies had returned to the earth. Their story was one of courage and sacrifice, of patience and determination, of the transformative power of love when it is given freely and without reservation. It was a story that deserved to be told and remembered, a reminder that even in the Wild West, even in times of terrible violence and injustice, human beings could still choose to be better, to love more deeply, to build bridges instead of walls. And so their story lived on, passed from parent to child, generation to generation, never forgotten, always cherished. The Apache healer and the cowboy who saved her, who hid her in a cave for months and fell in love while waiting, who built a life together against all odds and raised a family that became a testament to the power of love to change the world, one heart at a time.